But probably the major one, even though we missed the global financial crisis, I put a however here, the government's decided to introduce their own. It's not good enough that we missed out when the rest of the world had to cop it, and have introduced a resources super profit tax. I don't know how many people here have heard about this tax. Okay, it's pretty well spread, and in effect, what that's done is the government's saying, well, we think the mining companies and the oil and gas companies, they're making too much money. They're posting huge amounts of profit. The shareholders are getting huge dividends. We want a bigger slice of the pie. So forget the fact that they had some royalties coming in and that drove investment for the rest of the community. They sort of stated the fact that any gains in profit above the long-term bond yield rate of about 6%, which is effectively the risk-free rate, would be exposed to this resource super profit tax. That's 40% straight off the bat. So once you go across that threshold now, if you're in any primary non-renewable removal industry, 40 million goes straight to the resources profit. And then on the other 60 million, you still build your normal company tax. So effectively on $100 million profit, you're losing a $58 million slug to this super tax. And as you can imagine, that changes the rate of return, it changes the net present value, and it's caused a lot of upset on a lot of these major projects. Excuse me, nose isn't used to the dry humidity here. Yeah, well, that's it, that makes me cry. But the biggest thing is that it makes sovereign risk suddenly a real issue in Australia that wasn't there before. Previously, everyone, Australian, it's pretty easy going, it's pretty safe, but that's game changing. And suddenly, companies like BHP Billiton, the biggest company in the world for mining, who actually have their headquarters in Melbourne in Australia, are going, well, maybe I'll go invest in Brazil. I'll pay less tax, there's less risk. And when suddenly these sorts of companies are thinking Indonesia shows less of a sovereign risk than, say, Australia, you've got to ask yourself, what's this government trying to achieve here? So it's going in debate a lot now. It was done without consultation of industry, which is really what's bent a lot of people out of shape. No one's against paying tax, but I don't know about you guys, when I did my MBA, I understood the bond rate to be the risk-free rate. I wouldn't have called that anything above that was a super profit. That's the way they're going. To offset some of this, they're saying, well, what we'll do is we'll give you some tax credits for failed exploration. Well, that's great. So now the Australian taxpayer is funding for failed exploration efforts. That's why you become a shareholder. So it's got a long way to go. It'll make a lot more press, and before a lot of certainty in the continuation of the economy is going to be achieved, this has to be put to bed. And with an election later this year, the opposition government, they're all over it. They want to scuttle it. However, when you saw that population spread, you'll see that 75% of the population, again, aren't in those resource-rich states. So they probably perceive that more as, oh, okay, we're sharing the wealth a little bit more. Stay tuned, it'll be an interesting time at the end of the year. So just a bit about the Australian business environment for no one that's not so familiar. Despite that last slide, generally Australia has low sovereign risk. It's English language, so it makes it easy to do business for countries like Canada, like the US, UK, and British law. So you can be pretty sure with your contracts and your recovery and your payment terms, etc. The company tax rate's 30%, and the Australian government isn't too bad on mobile profits, repatriation of profits, moving funds in and out, the flow of capital. There's limited import duties and tariffs. Australia is very reliant on the rest of the world to bring in products and services, and therefore they don't put a big whack on the stuff that does come in. Pretty stable inflation levels, despite that super boom for about 4 years, and some of that was in more like states, like in Perth, we really felt it, but Sydney and Melbourne didn't get impacted as much. There's a strong monetary policy, the government's quite reactive, and the inflation levels do keep fairly steady. There's good banking and financial lending governance. Again, global financial crisis, the banks didn't typically fall over. There's a lot more sort of checks and balances with regards to loans and lending and the surety behind that. One thing to be aware of in Australia, there's some Indigenous land rights management that has to be done. It's certainly not impossible, it just takes some time, and the process has now been proven. It's been going for about 15, 20 years. So when you need to develop a project, you need to get access to land, you can go through the process, and the negotiation there does get your project over the line, but it just does take a little bit of time. And infrastructure, communications, finance, ports, roads. There's sealed roads typically between the capital cities. You get into some of those more remote areas, which is most of the country, you might just be going on a compacted earth road. Somewhere else it just might be where everyone else is driven. So, but to any of the places that need it, there is usually good infrastructure. And the last point there, the geographical location for Asian business and in interaction. It's very local to a lot of the Asian economies. On the Perth side especially, there's not much in a time difference. There's lots of regular flights. It's closer for me in Perth to fly up to Singapore than it is to fly to Brisbane, which is the same country. But it gives us good access to those markets. And that's really it. Thank you. Any questions?